6 or 7% of students like really identify as what they call explorers, like kids that have high levels of ownership and agency. And you kind of like put that parallel to the advances we're seeing in artificial intelligence, where like these companies, their goal is to give these machines agency. How do we help them problem solve? Do we help them take their time before they think through something, right? Like now it's like your AI tool is going to think a little bit before it responds to you. Like, whereas if you think about kids in the class, it's like, okay, give me an answer. You, right? The people who like cold call, and like AI tool has more autonomy to have time to think than we give most kids in a classroom. You think about a timed standardized test that they have to take, right? So you just think even expectations wise, like what we're creating is the difference between the two is really important. Decision making power, problem solving power, reasoning, all these things are being accelerated at a time when we seem to be taking them back from people. And to me, that's like the most urgent thing of this moment is to like we don't want a world where like your computers have more agency than the people you're raising as part of this generation.
Hello and welcome to Breaking the Paradigm. I'm your host, Andrew Falstich. The mission of this podcast is to have conversations that break the traditional paradigm of education, whether that's at the classroom level, the global level, or anywhere in between. We are not interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Rather, we are interested in truly transformational change. I am so excited for this episode to have Sabba Quidwai as my guest on Breaking the Paradigm. Sabba and I met last summer at the Hakuba Forum in Japan, which was perhaps the most transformational gathering of educators that I have ever been to. If you know Sabba or follow her online, she talks so much about AI in education, about design thinking in education, and has been someone whose work I've followed and admired for almost a year now since we met last summer. And she just wrote a book that came out, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, called Designing Schools, How Design Thinking Makes You Irreplaceable in the Age of AI. So welcome, Sabba, to Breaking the Paradigm.
Oh, thank you so much. And you saying the Hakuba Forum brought back so many good memories.
Yeah, it was a beautiful retreat in the Japanese Alps away from everything. And at a very turbulent time in my own work, it was truly the retreat that I needed.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
So, Sabba, you have a really interesting trajectory in education, and I know a little bit about it because of what I've heard from you in your own videos and podcasts and shorts and LinkedIn posts. But for folks on Breaking the Paradigm that are new to your work, what is your origin story? How did you find yourself here as really a thought leader in design thinking in education and AI in education?
So I'm so grateful for you asking this question because I realize there's a lot of people I'm connected to online. And, if you follow me online, sometimes I have opinions. And the other day I was like, oh, you know what? I should probably really explain to people like why I have really strong opinions. So it's like the perfect time. And I feel like the reason I came into this work, I always say it was by accident. And a really big part of it was I graduated in 2007 as a history teacher. And a couple months later was the recession. And so nobody ever talks to you about getting laid off, right? Everything in school is about like how you're gonna get hired and all the things you're gonna do. But nobody talks about how like, oh, those things might not happen because of all these other reasons. And so when I got my first layoff notice, like it was very confusing. It was really frustrating. It's like you do all this work, you do all these things, and now suddenly you're in this situation. And I remember like after a while, like having gone through it and navigating it, thinking like, why did I graduate so unprepared? Especially because like I went to a really good university and like I, like loved like a lot of things I learned in university. But if you think about it now, when I did look back and think about it, 2007 was also the year the iPhone came out, right? 2008, when I was getting laid off, there were so many people who were building companies and building things that today we couldn't imagine our lives without. Whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Airbnb, like all of these different companies, like that whole app economy was born during that time. And so a really big question that really became a driving just curiosity was why do some people get exposure to what's happening and other people don't? Is it accident? Does it just mean the network of people you're around? And so once I got settled in my career, right, because I would say about 2010, 2011-ish, I started to get into ed tech again by accident, just happened to have, somebody, a principal who was going that direction. And once I got into ed tech, it took me in a bit of a trajectory and, ended up at like USC, worked in higher ed for a couple of years, worked at Apple for a couple of years. And when I got to Apple in 2017, that's when I was like, whoa, okay, like what's next? Like, what do I even do after this? And that's when I was like, I need to look back. And so I went back to school to do my doctorate to look at what was the next big emerging technology going to be, which we knew was going to be AI. And what did we do wrong before? Like, why did people like me not graduate prepared? And what can we do differently to make sure people do graduate prepared? Because the one big thing I've learned is all the information is out there, right? There's people talking about things. You just have to have people who are going to bring it to you and curate it for you to show you, like, hey, this is where the world is going for your generation, not your or mine.
Well, that's a really key point because you just posted something, I don't know, recently about how we look at young people as AI natives and assume that they know all of the ins and outs of AI technology. And in fact, they don't, just like the digital natives didn't know all of the things about digital technology despite having a familiarity just because of a proximity at a younger age. And so I think that's such a huge component of how do we position our young people toward the world that they're going to live in, not the world that we're going to live in, or even the world that we want to just further because we're used to it or because it's comfortable for us.
Absolutely. And I think that's that thing, right? Like the assumptions that we carry about what people know, I think that's the big thing. And this, again, we can go back to like research, right? Like so many things are already laid out for us from prior iterations of these different technologies or these different experiences other people have had. But I think it was, oh my God, I might get it wrong. So forgive me if I do, but it was a person, I think in 2010 or 2011, who first coined that term digital native. So it like was around for a while. But in 2016, there was a really great paper written called The Digital Native Myth. And this guy was basically like, wait a minute, you're calling these kids digital natives, but just because they're like swiping on their phones all day doesn't mean they're proficient with how to problem solve with technology, how to create new products and services. Basically, they're using it in their personal lives. But when it comes to like academic and professional settings, there are different norms and different practices with which how this technology is applied. And they're not getting any of that info. So we have this like myth that they know how to like transfer those skills in their personal life to these other settings. And the reality is they don't. And there was actually a report that just came out about Gen Z. I think it was the Walton Family Foundation and Gallup that did it together. Same thing. So it's like it's just like the same story and the same cycle, like over and over again.
Yeah. And I think in so many ways, our system of schooling is not set up to follow the trends that are happening outside of schooling. So if we then ask educators to say, okay, help prepare young people for this world of AI and technology integration that they're going to see, well, some of our teachers don't even know through the systems that we've created that are continue to exist 100 years in the past and not moving toward the future. It's hard for them then to envision what that would even look like.
Yeah.
And particularly, I know that there's a huge amount of fear around it. And I know there's a big idea we want to talk about, but I'll share this story with you, Sabba, that 2 months ago, I was at a national Montessori conference and I was in a breakout room with probably about 40 other educators who work with adolescents. And and AI was brought up, and the overwhelming emotion around AI was complete fear, just 100% deer in the headlights. I don't know how to do this. I don't like it. And no one like we shouldn't even talk about it. We shouldn't even use it. We shouldn't even be a part of it. And that's not to say that everybody in the room felt that way, but there were some big and heavy emotions. And that to me, I think it's a big factor of it too, and that we're trying to prepare our young people for the future, but are we as adults even prepared to meet that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard. I always say more than like a technology challenge, like or a technology change, it's really so emotional, right? For so many people, and it should be. Like I also say that like if you're not feeling that way, you probably don't understand what's going on. And I think paired with that, I think where you are in the world also makes a difference to how you're feeling about this technology and how confident you feel in your government's ability to stabilize it, because that is kind of what people turn to, right? They tend to think that, oh, well, somebody else is going to figure it out for me, or like, oh, the government must have a plan, or like, okay, this is a big societal change. This is happening. And I think one of the things, if I go back to that 2007, now that's my timeline and that's my narrative. I'm sure people of different generations could pinpoint this even further and in even more context. But I really think this is like an ongoing like trajectory back from that time. Like, I don't think people adapted to mobile. I don't. So I think there's a lot of people that you have right now that are going from sort of like computer desktop 1980s type technology, and they missed the mobile part. And now they're being forced into the AI piece. Because I think people who adapted to mobile had two benefits. The first one was mobility, flexibility. You understood the concept of anything, anywhere, anytime. And the biggest data point we have to kind of prove, I think, or at least consider that we didn't adapt to mobile is remote work was such failure, right? Like you now have this huge trend of people going back to the office, which I do think has merit. And I do agree, especially I think for young people, I think there's a lot that they lose out on when they don't get those experiences just by default of what's around you. Like I think if you're not going to be I think if you're in a remote setting, you have to compensate a lot very proactively, which is usually a skill if you're really young, you probably don't have. So I do think there's a lot of merit there, but I think our inability to balance both of those pieces and actually even ask, well, why don't we do things a different way? Or if we are going to be remote first, the same way today people are like, oh, we're AI first. Well, if you are going to be these things first, what parts of your system, structures, routines, norms, habits need to change to be successful? And so I think we see a lot of those pieces carry forward.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And that leads us into this big topic that we wanted to talk about. So before the podcast, I asked Saba, what is the question, topic, idea that is really important for us to dig into or that's not being talked about enough? And what she said was, why are so many teachers still teaching alone? And so dig into that a little bit for us. Why do you feel like we're not asking that question enough? What's the inherent fallacy or thing that needs to be rethought about this siloed way that we think about teaching and learning?
I think it's a really hard job. And I remember, so if you read the book, the whole, like, I mean, all of my research when I first set out to do this project, it was really inspired by a school that I had seen in San Diego, California. And it was called Design 39. And what really struck me about Design 39 was one, it was a public school. And second, all the teachers like taught together. And I just remember thinking like, wow, like how come this isn't the norm? Like why do they get to do it but nobody else does? And it was a curiosity that just kind of stayed with me. And I think I first saw them in 2013 or 2014. This is about 3 or 4 years before I actually go to do my research. And every morning for 1 hour, they had negotiated like an MOU with their union to change their contract. And every morning for an hour, the teachers got together to kind of calibrate and plan for the day. And they had kind of like eradicated in some ways like the grade levels. Like it was like it was like K to 3, I think. And then it was like 4, 5, and then it was 6, 7, 8. And so they had kind of clustered themselves in this way, but they had like reimagined their schedule. They had just done so many things that like nobody else was doing. I was like, how come they get to do it and no one else does? And when I did the research, the number one, you would think, you're going to research AI in the future and da da da, that your whole report or your whole research would be about technology. And it wasn't. And that was probably one of the most surprising things to me. The number one word used by every single person that was interviewed, whether it was a survey or a focus group or a one on one, was trust. Every single person used that word. I trust the people I'm with, and I am trusted by those with. And if a lot of people go to visit the school, and as do many schools, and so it's kind of like if you can imagine like the iceberg, like what you see at the top is like the collaboration, teachers like getting together and like all those things that I had left with. But the research allowed me to kind of go below the iceberg to be like, they knew their strengths. They weren't doing everything. They kind of found like their zone of genius, and that's how they were operating from. So collectively, like one person said, well, when we work together, instead of one brain, we have 9 brains. And it's just like, why would you not do that? And you think about today, the load on most teachers, it's like, oh, now you're going to figure out coding, and now you're going to figure out AI, and now you're going to figure out SEL, and now you're going to figure out, we just keep adding and adding and adding. And it's so impossible to be an expert in all of these areas, let alone look at the interdisciplinary lens of what that is. And so I think this first really struck me during the pandemic when so many people just took their bell schedules and made them Zoom schedule.
Right.
I would literally have people be like, join the Zoom at 7:54 a.m. And I'm like, what? Like, that's so weird. They're like these very basic practices. Like, I just think we have an opportunity right now, as uncomfortable as it is. People always think like, yes, but I have to do this. And at some point, like that mindset is going to hurt you more than help you. Because if you don't take a hot moment to figure it out, somebody else will. And when somebody else starts to step in and come in and think that they can redesign our systems and do all these other things as we're watching currently play out in like, the government space. I think it was a great example of what happens when people think the government is inefficient. I can do it better. And I think, we already see people do that with schools. And I think you're going to see it even more. And so it's just so much better to like own that process as an organization yourself than let somebody else come in because you couldn't take the time to figure it out.
I mean, and we have to own it. And I love in the book, you give an example of things that people give as their can't do's. Well, we can't do whatever innovation because of the schedule, or we don't have time to collaborate, or because we have to do this testing. And I have been, over the past year, I've had the pleasure of working with some different schools and different practitioners. And honestly, the biggest work has been exactly what you're saying, of pulling apart the things that you actually have to do as compared to the things you feel like you have to do. And it is usually the things that schools and individual educators feel like they have to do that create the barriers for what in their wildest dreams they could create without this constraint. And so when we think about things like grades, when we think about things like, integrated interdisciplinary learning, all of those things are totally possible if we just decide we don't actually need to separate learning into these black boxes that happen into 45-minute chunks, right? We can report whatever we want to the state, but that doesn't mean we have to do it. That doesn't mean we can't talk about history outside of 9 to 9:45, right? But it's so hard for us to come out of those ideas. And yet that is what truly will, because we have this cultural idea that we have to adhere to these things. And I think your idea of trust is so critical, not just among the teaching staff, but also from the teaching staff to the young people. And I think that's a big part of it is if we, do things like break up grade levels and put mixed age levels and support student-centered learning and give the students a meaningful opportunity to try new things, well, we have to trust them in order for that to happen. And yet, at least in the United States context, so much of how we view young people, and particularly teenagers, but I'd say young people more broadly, is from a space of mistrust, that if we don't actively dictate every moment of their day, they won't do things that they're supposed to do. And in so many ways, that, in my mind, is also one of those major pieces that's holding us back from really rethinking so many things.
But the Montessori method challenges that, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And so we talk a lot in Montessori about what Montessori herself called spiritual preparation, but it does not have to do with religion. It has to do with your inner ability to reflect on your own experiences in the world, your own background. Montessori wrote that a couple of quotes that I love to throw out there is that we need to reawaken our imagination for what's possible. And we have to see the young person that's not yet there, not the one that's right in front of us, but what they could be. But what I'll say is this, and I think it's true in any school setting. It's really easy to just fall back on what we know, especially when we're overwhelmed or overworked or tired or things are happening in our lives outside of school. And I think so much of it comes down to your inner disposition. I mean, I've known people who come in as their first year teaching in the classroom, and their inner work and preparation is so well done that they're able to make meaningful connections and build that trust right away. And likewise, I've seen educators, I worked really closely with many of them who've worked in the field for 10, 15, 20 years, have all the degrees and credentials, and have not healed within themselves their past experiences that led them to feel that they shouldn't be trusted as children. And then that prevents them from trusting the young people that they're working with in that moment. And so, we can study it, we can talk about it, but so much of, and I talk about it, that's not the purpose of this podcast, but I talk about it on almost every episode. That inner reflection and preparation is, in my mind, the make it or break it. Because even to get back to this idea of why do so many teachers teach alone, you have to, if you're going to collaborate with somebody else, you have to engage in a level of vulnerability, of
Yeah.
dialogue of being willing to be wrong and to iterate and to try something new and not feel like you have to protect yourself and always have all the right answers and have all of your students get a certain percentage. And it all comes back to that inner preparation.
That is so fascinating because when I was interviewing the teachers at Design 39, they said that like, when you ask them like what are the challenges you deal with collaboration, it came down to like ego and some of those like more like those inner workings, right? Like your own sometimes like insecurities or like not being able to feel safe. And that's really where the work we tied it into the work of Amy Edmondson with psychological safety, right? Like if people don't feel safe sharing an idea, if they don't feel safe making a comment, if they don't feel safe like asking a question, it's actually really hard to even build on top of that. So actually in a lot of our work that we do, and sometimes people will tell us like take those questions out. But in our needs assessment, anytime we start working with you, a lot of people think our survey is going to be just about how are you using AI. And actually, a lot of our questions are actually from Amy Edmondson, like a 7-question survey that just gives you a read on like a general read on like how safe do people feel in your organization. And literally, sometimes people will be like, "Oh, I know how everyone's going to answer that. Take that out. Like, we can't put that in." And it's like, it's going to go anywhere. But like, without that data, we can't begin that healing work and that process if we don't even know how people are feeling, where people are feeling it, and how we can begin to break those silos. And it's why I like design thinking and particularly AI in design thinking, because I think that work when I did design thinking pre AI, it was actually very, very, very hard for people to really implement. And a lot of that is a lot of, like you said, self-work that has to go. It's a mindset, right? Like
Mhm.
80% of design thinking is your mindset. And if your mindset isn't there and that's not being nurtured on a regular basis, it is harder for you to believe in them without kind of just like making it more about going through the motions, right? Oh, okay, we did the empathy work. Oh, okay, here's my problem statement. Oh, like you don't really get that whole like interchange. But when you focus more on mindset, it really, really, really opens up like a whole new world for you where people will be like, well, this is actually just like a life skill to have. And so going back to like that, that kind of that thing that we shared earlier around teachers and collaboration, it wasn't actually until you just asked me this question that I even thought about it because I talk so much about AI being a teammate. But I think it's like so sad that like we have to actually think so much about like AI being the teammate because the reality is most people don't get that time and space to be each other's teammates.
Mhm.
And I think that is, to me, that's the real imperative work right now is really rebuilding that human connection, really giving people a moment to really consider, like, just, I always tell people, like, just give people a moment. Like, we literally don't even give people a moment to process what's happening right now in the world. It's just, here's AI, use AI. If you're fearful of AI, like, stop being fearful of AI and start using AI. Let me give you the best baby step, even if it's so awful that I can come up with, just so you use AI. And I think it's actually really okay to like, I think, like I said in the beginning, I think you should be afraid in many ways because I don't think we have enough good leaders right now who are going to figure this out for us. If anything, so many leaders are so driven by their own self interests, right? That I do think people should be concerned. And I think fear isn't a bad thing. I think it's okay to be afraid. To kind of your point, right? Normalizing some of this, like it's okay to be afraid. And actually, when people are afraid, sometimes that is the motivator for them to be more aware and to take action instead of being bystanders in letting everything unfold in the hands of other people. It sometimes does help you be more proactive.
And does that give us an opportunity to lean in to that fear or to that discomfort or whatever we're feeling? Because that can, illuminate things that we need to think about externally, but also illuminate within ourselves. What are those areas for revision, for reflection, for a dialogue that we hadn't considered? I think one of the things I love about your book is you talk about how to make teaching the best job ever again. And I think so much of what makes traditional teaching really hard is you're alone. You're in this pressure cooker. You're accountable to things that, you're accountable to student achievement, which really isn't something you can control anyways. And you're in some ways competing against other teachers, and it really creates this really toxic environment. And what if all of those things were just removed when we're talking about teachers collaborating with each other? We're talking about interdisciplinary work. We're talking about trusting students and coming up with more holistic ways to think about learning in so many ways. That's why I'm in Montessori education, because so much of that is already baked into it, because I've taught in non-Montessori settings. I mean, I'll tell you, there's no way I would still be in education if that were the work I was doing. I
Yeah.
just, I'd say like that's just not the place for me. And even then, on the flip side of that, to lean into that work, and I think people feel this with AI too, there's so much uncertainty because you're dealing with human beings and that's
Yep.
what's going to happen. But I've seen people leave this work because they say, I can't take it. I want to walk in with my plan and know exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and control A to Z. Well, if we're really engaged in a human endeavor where we're all co-creating, not just staff, but staff and students, we have to really be available to the pivot, to the new idea, to the redirect. Just last week, I was getting ready to facilitate a workshop with some students, and I was, taking my final notes, and there was a student sitting a couple seats over from me, and he was doing something else. I said, "Hey, if I asked you this question, what would your response be?" And he said, "Oh, that's way too vague. I wouldn't have any idea how to respond to that." And I said, "Okay, well, how can we make this better?" We spent the 15 minutes before the workshop. He and I revised the whole thing together, and then I went in and we did it. It ended up being great. But if I hadn't felt, if I wasn't available to asking him that question and then honestly hearing his response, that experience would have totally fallen flat with my high schoolers. So I think that's such an important part of it to think about too.
Absolutely. You know what's so funny? So I'm still a little bitter from this, but so I work with new teachers at UC Irvine, and I do observations. I go to the classes, and like obviously they have their mentor teacher, the one that whose class they're assigned to. And so for me, I'm always thinking about the advice I give and the feedback I give as I do these observations about their future, right? Like I get this is the classroom you're in. This is some of the stuff that's going on. Some of it's on the more traditional side, and whatnot. So I'm always balancing their feedback. Like, yes, this is the feedback I'm going to give you for now, but like your career, like the world, like the teaching career in 5 years is going to look so different. And they're only going to be 27. They're not even 30 years old, most of these kids, right? So they're so young. So it's so funny, like the teachers they're assigned do evaluation. And so one of them did in their evaluation of me, wrote in there, they were like, and it's redacted, so I'm not supposed to know, but obviously you know them so well. So I'm just like, I know who this is. But in their evaluation, they go, it's clear that the most important criteria for Sabba is that the student teacher develop a strong relationship with the student. That's important to me too. But it's also important to know that we have like pacing guides and the realities of inside the classroom. And I was like,
Mhm.
wow, like I actually, it really made me realize how many people misinterpret what it means to build a relationship and why relationships are the heart and center of not just your good instructional practices, but also, behavior and just like the environment of your space. And it's exactly the example you just shared. Somebody that has a strong relationship with their learners is always going to see and recognize this is a question we need to ask. We need to pause here and do this. I'm noticing this. I'm going to invite you in to create this. And it was just a really, I was like, you know what? That's like the best like criticism like you can give me. If that's like, like, yes, I'm proud to say that, yes, I do believe the number one thing you should be developing as a young person is good relationship. Otherwise, what happens is you get frustrated. Right. And or like this is something that I hear a lot when I'm observing is okay, yeah, we'll get to that later. Okay, everybody back to this now. And it's like you lose those moments. And so it's
Mhm.
constantly also trying to make them aware of like when they ask you this question, it's because they trust you. They're bringing it to this space that they share with you. How will you honor those questions without just being like, oh yeah, good. Okay, but let's move on now because we need to get through this. And so I think that concept of relationship really, I think we use a lot of words, I think, that we don't define well, but we use them as if everybody understands what they mean. And I've come to realize a lot of people don't really understand what it means to have strong relationships with kids. It's not just about, I'm going to be nice to you or we're going to laugh together or something along those lines. We really have to be intentional about defining what it's going to look like.
Yeah, we absolutely do. I mean, this is relational work and, just from start to finish. And I think so much of what I love about my work is I don't have to do just in case education, which is what I would call your typical here's this year and you have to teach these things. What I am privileged to do is to really teach just in case just in time education. So, what are the things that you are interested in right now that I can help you capitalize on, but I can only get to a place where you as the learner can tell me these things if we've built that really strong relationship. And I think it even gets at the heart of this idea of prioritizing content over human development and human flourishing, because, we have this idea that we need to force young people to learn these things in this way. Well, we know that that's not really natural to our growth and development as human beings, particularly the way it's taught. And so, what do? We don't change what we're teaching. We try to develop classroom management strategies. So, years ago, I was not, well, I guess a year ago, I was involved in alternative teacher certification in the state of Maryland. So, I supported both folks getting their certifications in early childhood, but also in secondary education. And they were going right into the traditional system here. And on one of my first days working with the secondary group, the group that was going through the certification was doing some mock lessons. So they were giving a lesson to a group of mostly adults, but the college had brought in some high school students to purposely be plants that were disruptive. So, they start eating in class, or, tapping their pen, or like talking over other people, basically to test this instructor's ability to control their behavior. And I'm sitting there observing this, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't have these problems. And it's not because my high school students are any different from these young people or any other young people, but this environment is not designed to meet their needs. So, of course, they're going to get bored and distracted and do other things. And in that setting, if you believe your goal is content, then yes, you're going to try to control their behavior. But that's actually not an inherent problem of young people. It's an inherent problem of the system of school. And what something like design thinking, in my mind, can help us really uncover is, if that's a problem of the institution of schooling, then how do we rethink that rather than trying to change our young people themselves? Because that is ultimately an impossible task.
And that's so, I could not agree with you more. And it's so funny because I think that what you just said became so clear to me when my sister had her first child. So I have a niece and nephew. We're three sisters, and one of my sisters has two kids. So I have a nephew who's 6 and a niece that's 2. And ever since I met them, I stopped saying we need to teach kids these skills, and I started saying we need to preserve. Because when I look at my niece and nephew, they have everything people are constantly writing about trying to give kids in the world. And
Mhm.
we are bored with these skills and these qualities and these mindsets. And it's truly taken away from us. But this is another thing I learned because Sir Ken Robinson says school kill creativity. So
Mhm.
you some dramatic act, oh, all of a sudden this assignment happens or this grade level happens. People want you to believe oh, the third grade dip and whatnot. And it's true. But I think the reason we see that is it's so tiny. It happens so like the size of an atom is the rate at which it happens. You can't even see it, but it's really subtle. And this is why I really zone in on the relationship piece, because it's in every comment that you make to that. They are so impressionable, so impressionable. So anytime you tell them, be quiet, anytime you tell them, sit here, the compounding of that is what kills their creativity and their skill set over time. Then you pair that with the homework kind of element, taking away the play, taking away my niece and nephew, when they come home, they're keeping themselves so occupied. I mean, obviously, if you put the TV on for them, they're going to go sit in front of the TV. But you turn the TV off, and they will find 10,000 things to do, things to play with, things to come up with, ideas they're creating, just the random things they're putting together. And it just is fascinating to watch. But it is really taken away from you in such a minute way that you couldn't actually even pinpoint a moment that it happened. It's the compounding of those moments that create, I think, that lack of agency. And I think that's the thing that makes this moment so critical, is at a time when all our data points, there was a really Rebecca Winthrop and Jenny, I forget her last name, of her co-author, the book, The Disengaged Teen. And when you look at how they identify the lack of agency in kids, I think it's like 6 or 7% of students really identify as what they call explorers, like kids that have high levels of ownership and agency. And you kind of put that parallel to the advances we're seeing in artificial intelligence, where these companies, their goal is to give these machines agency. How do we help them problem solve? How do we help them take their time before they think through something, right? Now it's your AI tool is going to think a little bit before it responds to you. Whereas if you think about kids in the class, it's okay, give me an answer. You, right? The people who like cold call, and like AI tool has more autonomy to have time to think than we give most kids in a classroom. You think about a timed standardized test that they have to take, right? So you just think even expectations wise, like what we're creating is the difference between the two is really important. You think about AI tools like decision making power, problem solving power, reasoning, all these things are being accelerated at a time when we seem to be taking them back from people. And to me, that's like the most urgent thing of this moment is to like we don't want a world where like your computers have more agency than the people you're raising as part of this generation.
Right. I mean, and you said it so beautifully there. And even to go back to your idea about psychological safety, our schools that are based in compliance and control are not psychologically safe places. I mean, just by definition, if you are seen as an object to be manipulated for the goals of some principal, superintendent, policy writer, by definition, that's not a place where you can really be yourself and experiment and try new things. And I totally agree with you that we can't actually teach anything, that we preserve and we try to bring out as much as we can. And I had a really good friend of mine, and he and I co-taught years ago. We started a school together down in Florida, and he now has a 3-year-old. And I saw him last fall, and he and I were chatting, and he's been in education for over 40 years in progressive settings. And he said, as I watch my daughter grow up, I don't know if I even want her in school. And this has been my career for 40 years. I've done schooling, even schooling that's different from traditional. And he said, I still see the danger of dimming that fire, of dimming that inside her that lights her up about learning about the world and her environment and all of these things. And that was really it was such a wake up call to me. And then when we look at the data over the last 10 years, I spent some time the last few months doing research on the adolescent mental health crisis. And when you look at what teenagers are reporting in terms of anxiety, school and the pressure to achieve is high on the list, higher than drugs, higher than social pressure, higher than dating, higher than all of these other things that we typically assume plague teen. Schooling is ranking on top of the list. We know that adolescents are seeing higher rates of anxiety and depression over the last 10 years than they were previously. We know suicide rates among adolescents are getting higher. We know that during the school year, suicide rates go up, and during the summer, they plummet. And that's not mirrored in the adult population. And so we have an institution of school that really is not only smothering young people and their passion and their curiosity, but it's also in many ways deeply harming them and their mental health. And then we say, oh, well, look at all these young people with mental health problems. It must be the fact that they have phones. So let's just take their phones away, further a system of compliance and control. Now, we didn't trust you with very little autonomy. Now we're going to take even more of that away from you, which we know from research in self-determination theory that when people are in circumstances of control, they exhibit antisocial behaviors and they're more prone to have poor mental health. Well, we're just continuing to perpetuate that system, but
Yeah.
isn't technology such an easy scapegoat for that?
That is so true. You know what's even more fascinating about like if we were to add on to that with the AI piece is when I think it was Harvard Business Review that just came out with like the top 100 use cases, therapy and life advice is like the first use case. So,
Yep.
so to your point, there's such a solid through line around the problems we experience, but also like what we can do about them, right? Like there are like methods, like a lot of people I think want people to believe, well, this is so new. We don't really know what we're supposed to do. So we're just going to slowly figure it out. Yes, we're going to make mistakes. And like, that is design thinking. Part of that is learning from failure, but not when it comes to like the evidence-based practices and things that we already know about things. It's not okay to say, I don't think it's okay to be like, yeah, we're just going to make these mistakes because we think AI is new. And so there's no, sort of previous kind of anything for us to be able to go off of when the reality is like, yes, the technology itself is new and definitely overwhelming, but there are just so many things we can lean into to guide us in how we make informed decisions and choices about, I think, just really preserving people and their role and place and identity and purpose in this current moment. There's just so much research out there and evidence and examples and stories of people who are building these models like yourself and like, who are engaging in these practices that we can learn from. And the reason in the book I talk so much about calling out specifically the things people say they can't do is I feel like for about at least 8 years prior to actually doing the research, I had heard between my own role being and when I was at the high school, between being in higher ed, between being at Apple, I had heard just about every single excuse people give for why they don't do what they do. So when
Hmm.
I went to do the research, I made sure to like check every single box for why nobody could come back and be like, well, we can't do this because of this. And even if pre AI, one thing you maybe could have told me was time, right? But the beautiful thing about AI is the big benefit that I see if we use it right. Those constraints that are so hard for your mindset to overcome are not a challenge for your AI tool. And I do see when people put the constraints in and they start to get ideas that challenge what they thought was not possible, they're curious. Like, oh, I never thought about that. So then what if this? Oh, well then what about this? And it's like that to me is the power. That's why I'm so anti these pre-designed AI education apps where like the drop-down menus, like even just the drop-down menu alone, or just the option to even create alignment to a standard already limits your mindset for what you believe you. I've put you in a box before you even started. Whereas when people get to ask, well, like, I think this is impossible and we're never going to be able to do it, and they start typing away and then they see an answer for how you could do it. It is a moment. That's what we call the human spark. Like, it is a moment that like sparks something within them for something they hadn't thought of before, but now it's in their head. Now they see a possibility and they see an opening. And so I think there's so much power in this moment to do the right thing, but there's also too much, I think, fear that people are afraid to confront. Like, I don't know how many people are okay being in a room where other people are afraid, and I'm just going to let you be afraid, and that's okay. But these are the hard things we need to talk about and do, and we can just all be afraid together. I think there's too many people that just want to like kill fear and like make everyone happy, and that's not normal.
Right. And that's not how we grow. And if we're really, and I mean, I think it's the question of are we committed to building systems that support young people toward their future or just perpetuating what we experienced as young people? I mean, I think that's such an element of it too. I've run into so many teachers that have great progressive ideas and want to implement new things, but then there will be pieces of their practice that are so traditional, and I'll say, well, why are you doing that? Well, that's what I had in high school and I turned out just fine. It's like, well, oh, hold on. We can hold two things at once. We can say, this was, my experience and this isn't what I'm going to do moving forward. And actually at Hakuba, I met somebody who also went to my same high school. We didn't know each other at the time, which was so funny. She's a school founder in Beijing and she's in a project-based learning school. I'm in a Montessori setting. And both of us were chatting and we both said, yeah, we liked our experience in high school. We'd never teach that way. We would never start a school like that. And it's not to mean that, my high school was bad or that the people that, or that my experience was bad. I mean, I had a good time in high school. I have a lot of fond memories. And that's also not the experience I would offer to my students because I know that there's a better way. And I know that a lot of young people fell through the cracks of that very traditional New England prep school experience. And I don't want that to be the experience for most people. But holding those two things is really hard. And it was hard for me for a long time to not look back negatively on my own life experience if I were doing something different. And it comes all the way back to that inner preparation. Are we prepared to sit with that fear, that discomfort, and then walk through that to build something that's really meaningful and impactful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's like the great time because you don't have to do it alone, right? If you can't think of the idea, if you need to like have a space, like you've got people, but you've also got these AI tools that can assist you in that process. And so, yeah, like I said, there's a lot of possibility in this moment. That it reminds me, like, this is what made the Huckleberry Forum so amazing with like these other conversations. And I think it's just something important for like, I think there's a lot of conferences these days that are very tool driven and not like human driven enough. And I think creating more spaces where people can, we call them like therapy sessions, but I think you need more of those for people to just unpack their own thoughts and their own feelings and to normalize that. Because as things change even more, I think fears are going to increase. I think it was Obama the other day who was like, hey, like, I mean, you hear it from everyone. I think now everybody is more comfortable saying there's going to be massive disruption, right? This like, oh no, you're going to be fine. You're a teacher. Like you'll never be replaced. Like I don't think you can go to anybody these days and say that. And so again, I go back to like, I think fear is a motivator. I think it's comfortable. I think it's a feeling you should be okay having, not something that you should should be eradicated completely.
Yeah. And even this idea of, well, teachers are going to be replaced. If we see teachers as mere dispensers of knowledge, well, sure, you could have replaced a teacher with a book. Now you can replace it with an AI chatbot. But if we see teaching as that relational aspect that you described with the folks you work with that, at the college level, these new teachers, I mean, that's no robot, no AI can replace that because and I know you call it the human advantage with AI. I think there's such an opportunity to using AI as a brainstorming partner and as thinking through new ideas. And at the same time, I've also known educators who are like, write this lesson plan, and the first thing that pops up on AI, they just print out and hand out, or give me 10 essay prompts, they print out and hand out. And that is not taking advantage of the human advantage. So I wonder in your work with educators, what that human advantage has looked like. How have educators used AI to amplify that with that which they have inside them to create a truly transformational experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like a really big part of it is just the things that we see people doing with like the Spark method. And it really varies because everything is so contextual for different people. But one of the things that we do a lot, so like if you're listening, for example, like you can do this too. We basically do these like empathy interviews. And I think the biggest thing that happens through that is like the Spark prompting framework is basically a dressed up empathy interview, right? It's like I'm going to sit with you and I'm going to ask you, like, tell me about like what you do. Tell me about the biggest problem that you're experiencing right now. If everything was perfect and you had your ideal setting, what would that look like for you? Which is really interesting because that is the one most people pause on because they don't even know how to describe what amazing would look like to them or what amazing would feel like. Like if I could have everything my way and I had the ideal classroom experience and like lesson or like whatever it was I was trying to create in that environment, what would that look like? Like name those things. People pause. And so it's an indicator as well to be like, hey, we need to spend more time dreaming. We need to spend more time thinking about what we really want. And then what would a result or an outcome look like to you? And ask your tool for like 3 to 4 ideas. And so we just see people create like really incredible things that address their own challenges, but more importantly, things that they thought were impossible before now all of a sudden are possible for them. And I think one of my favorite examples is, I mean, I have 2. I mean, I have so many, so I hate to, like, call out 1 or 2 people, but, like, I guess the 2 that just, like, immediately come to mind is, one of my friends. Her name is Tara Mangini, and I met her for the first time, I think, at an ISTE conference, and she was just sitting in one of the sessions. She had learned a little bit about design thinking. She came to this session about AI and design thinking, and she went back to her school, and they had an elective that was going to be opened up. So there was a bit of conversation around what should the elective topic be and things like that. And I'm probably not doing full justice to her story, but I'll try. I'm paraphrasing a lot. But anyways, long story short, she was able to advocate for 2 of the teachers coming together to co-teach instead of doing computer science over here. And I think it was a maker class over here. She's like, why don't we combine the 2 together into one elective, co-teach? And like it took about 6 months to like go through the process, the proposal, and all of that, but they got it through. And one of the first projects they did was, like, designing the school of the future. But it goes back to, like, that if you don't ever believe something is possible, you'll never go out and advocate for it in that way. And I think that's the biggest, if I had to put as a theme, the biggest thing I see from people when they engage in this work, they become advocates for what they want to see. Does it 100% pan out every single time? No, but it gives them the confidence to ask. It puts the conversation out there, and it was one of the best things I liked when I did the interview at Design 39. The teacher said, when somebody has an idea and they put it on the table, it's no longer their idea, it's our idea. And so now the idea can be molded, it can be shaped. And so I think there's a lesson there as well for people that these things don't happen overnight. When you do want to do something that's like a big transformation, like, hey, we're going to go from teaching these 2 electives to combining something. There is a process we go through. There is like conversations to be had, and you do have to follow those. And I find a lot of people get very, what's the word? They get very like jaded or discouraged when it doesn't go right the first time. Oh, they didn't listen to me. Oh, I sent the, it didn't happen. Oh, I did this. And it's like, no, like that's a mindset, right? That's where the learn from failure comes in, right? Like, okay, it's okay. So if that person did it, try again. And even if they don't get it in the moment, you planted the seed and people will always remember that person when things do come back. So now, like Tara, for example, she's on her like district tech committee, she's leading PDs. Like a year ago, none of this was happening, right? And now here she is, and she's 50 years old. Yeah, I think that's like so important to know because people like, whatever reasons put age and whatnot. But this is somebody like this is something anybody can do. You just have to take the initiative. Like I always say, the technology part honestly is easy. It's the human work that's the hard part.
And it goes back to even that fear. We have such a fear of failure in our culture, but also in our schools. I mean, think about the way that we set up our systems of assessment in traditional schooling. If you're not right the first time, you're wrong, and you're permanently penalized for being wrong. We don't actually create a culture in, our broader society where we prioritize or we even honor people who say, hey, I was wrong about this thing and I've learned about it. Now I've come to this new idea, or I tried this thing and it didn't work. And now I'm coming to this new idea. And that's one of the hardest parts when I bring in students who are not from Montessori into my program is they're so nervous about being wrong. Well, I don't want to share anything because it's not going to be right, or I'm going to choose this easy path because I don't want to, I don't want to do the wrong thing and be docked points. Well, my expectation is do this as many times as you need to until it's at a place where you feel confident and comfortable. And I expect you to take 2, 3, 4, 5 tries on whatever it is you're doing before you're really at a place where you're ready to move forward with it. And it totally flips that on its head. And we're fighting this cultural idea, and teachers have it too. Well, if I've taught this way for 10 years, for me to do something different now would be to admit that that wasn't what I should have been doing or could have been doing or whatever that might be. And it feels so much more emotionally safe to stick with that thing that I've been doing rather than admit that, hey, I'm trying this new thing and it might not work out. But, because again, it's coming back to that idea of accountability as being top down, right, wrong, one and done type deal. And we need to totally shift that culture so that we're okay with stepping into what you observed at Design 39.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we always say, like it doesn't have to be like Design 39. I think the beauty of the design thinking process is you create what is most beneficial for your community because that's the empathy piece, right? Like I think that's what really helps people break silos, not even just physically, but even just like mentally about sharing information, sharing stories, just even coming to terms with like what they dislike, what's hard, with what they wish they could have, and like their goals, their hopes, dreams, motivations, challenges, all those different things come together in those spaces when you kind of lead with that empathy lens.
Yeah. Well, I am looking at the time. And so, Sabba, if folks want to learn more from you and they have a lot to learn from you because you have such a wide body of work, where can they go? Where should they explore? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, I always say the best way is just to go to designingschools.org. And it's like a choose your own adventure. We have like podcasts, we have a YouTube channel. I always say, I think if you follow me on like LinkedIn or Instagram, you probably get the most like daily kind of updates. That's probably where I spend the most time day to day. YouTube podcast is mostly like weekly, but yeah, wherever you enjoy getting your information, you can probably find us just about anywhere.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for being on the podcast. This is a really great conversation. I know that those listeners will definitely learn a lot from it. So thank you again, Sabba, and to all of those who are listening on Breaking the Paradigm. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Breaking the Paradigm is brought to you by the generous subscription of listeners and readers like you. If you enjoyed the ideas that you heard or want to engage further and get our emails straight to your inbox, please consider becoming a free or a paid subscriber on our Substack page. It allows us to get a broader reach, and you'll always get the latest news, updates, and ideas that are thought-provoking and that serve us to break the traditional education paradigm and make education more humanizing together.